Now that my poster is laid out consistently and I know that my spacing for each of the shapes is correct across all of the different shapes, I know that they're all placed to be technically precise. Again, I want to probably focus on some of these that are not optically correct, so the star looks very small compared to all of the other shapes here. But first I want to adjust some of the typefaces that I'm using just to try to make this a little bit more appealing. So in order for me to do that, I can start relying more heavily on my style sheets, and this will help you to see the benefit of using them as well. So the first thing I might want to do is adjust the text that takes up the most space, or that we see the most frequently, and that's really the paragraph text. So I'm going to open up my P style sheet, and I'm going to zoom in before I do that just so I can see a little bit better and get where I can see maybe one row of content. I'm going to open up my style sheet here, and I'm going to essentially just try on some different typefaces and see what I think. But if I do it from my style sheet, if it's applied to every piece of text that needs to have this style, then they're all going to change, and it's going to save me a ton of time. So this is a great way to try on different aesthetics and see what you think. So I'm going to go with let's try to find something that's more readily available. So usually in print we want to use sans serif faces for our headings, and then we want to use serif faces for our bodies. If you're studying type, you're learning a little bit about that. And let's just see what Adobe Clean looks like. With preview on, I can see it. Not much of a change. Let's try to find something just a little bit more interesting than that. See, we're in Charlotte. No, that's terrible. Handwriting face. Those are good for certain logos, but only in very specific use cases. Okay, let's try Avenir. It's a nice aesthetic, but it is not a serif face, so I might want to consider using that for my headings. So let's keep looking, see if we can find just a decent serif face that's a little bit more interesting. We can maybe try Garamond. Go see if we can find Garamond here. Again, nothing very special, so I could try Georgia, I could try Garamond. Let's try Garamond Pro. So there I get a decent serif face. The serifs are the little feet along the bottom. It essentially kind of creates the illusion of a line to supposedly guide the eye. But now I have all of my type here settled that way. And now I can come back to my H2s, and maybe I use Avenir there. So I'm going to come to my basic character formats. This is in no way a recommendation of a type pairing. I'm kind of just choosing things at random, to be honest with you. I'd spend a little bit more time working on a type pairing before I finish this up, and I would like for you to do the same, but just as an example. Let's go find Avenir here. Pretty commonly used typeface right now, and that's right here. Let's also make this bold. So another option that you have, by the way, if you really like a certain typeface, if you find a family that has a lot of different weights, it might make sense for you to just use the same face throughout and choose different weights. I am going to choose medium here, and that's a pretty good contrast there. So I'll click OK, but what I really want you to notice is that all of them are changing as I'm making these changes to my style sheets, and that's really the benefit of using style sheets. So now I've got this type up here. I'm going to come to the block quote, and for this one I may want to go back to Garamond because it's more body type. Let's see. Let's go find Adobe Garamond. And here, even though it's a little bit larger, just to create a little bit more of a hierarchy, I might want to at least go semi-bold. And then the last thing is my H1. We'll come back to Avenir for that. And And this time, instead of medium, we'll go black. And we notice some changes happening, right? We're seeing some of this text start to move. And notice too this tiny little red box with a red plus sign in it. I want you to be aware of that and start looking for that, because what that means is that you have overset text. That means there's more text than will fit in the text box and that it won't all print. And we definitely want to avoid that anytime that we're typesetting. So what I want to do now is probably make this heading just a little bit smaller, because by making it bold, it expanded the thickness of each shape, and now I have overset text. So I'm going to come back to my basic character formats and move really just from 30 to 35 is fine. And then I still feel like this is way too close to this given the amount of space that I have on these other lines. So I'm also going to come back to my block quote, and I'm just going to reduce the leading and possibly the point size of that as well. I'm going to come down to maybe 16 or 17 point. I'm going to use 17 because I like the flow of the edges of the text here, and it doesn't leave me with a really short line right here. And then I'm going to reduce my leading just a little bit so that I have a little bit more space between the shapes and that piece of text. I'll go a little bit more down to about 24. And that's already starting to feel a little bit more interesting. I feel like my paragraph text right now is just a little bit small, and I did have more room with it from before, so maybe I'll come back to my paragraphs and maybe increase their point size just a little bit. And that's already starting to create more interesting lines on the edges here. And I do have a couple of widows that I would want to take care of. That's actually still working okay too. So I might go up to that 14 and then increase my leading by just a little bit. Again, just to give a little bit more generous spacing. Let's try 14 on 17. It's a little tighter than I would normally go, but it's not too bad. And so now when I zoom out, it's at least not the default typefaces anymore. It's starting to look a little bit more interesting. Still have some strange spaces here. And if I was going to handle that, I would probably rearrange the order of the shapes to address that and try to figure out a place where I could put those to where they were, you know, that extra space was more useful. And they'd probably be together on the same line. They probably wouldn't be in the middle. I'd probably put them on the outside so that it creates kind of a taper effect on the text. And they'd probably be at the bottom. But for now, I'm going to stick with this. You have one more objective to meet in the assignment criteria, and that is that each time, or at least once, when the shape name is mentioned in this paragraph text, you need to make it stand out in some way. It needs to be bold or italic or a different color, something like that. Now, so far we've learned about paragraph styles, and hopefully you're starting to see the benefit of them in that using paragraph styles, remember, a paragraph style should be applied to every single piece of text on your page. But this is an exception to the rule. So this already has a paragraph style applied to it, and we don't want to change that. We just want to make the word circle or oval stand out here, or in this case the word triangle. We want to make that stand out so that we're emphasizing it a little bit. In order to do that, what we want to do is to create a character style. And the reason for that is that if I was to just select the word circle here, and then I came back to my character panel, and let's say I decided I wanted to make that italic, right? So I choose bold italic. That might look fine, but there are certain markers within this software that lets us know if we might have unwanted or unintended formatting. And one of those is what's called a style sheet override. So now, if I select this style sheet, you notice this little plus sign next to the character P. We don't ever want to see these plus signs if we can help it. What that means is that some style has been added to this that is not represented in the style sheet. So usually what that means is it's trying to let you know that there's probably a mistake somewhere in your formatting. And we use these to make sure that we don't have mistakes. So we want to check for these so that we can make sure that we don't have any unwanted styles, and this lets us, it's kind of a red flag that we have them. The way to get around that is to make sure that the software knows that this change is intentional. So if I do a Command Z and I select this paragraph again, you see I don't have that plus because all of this style is programmed into the style sheet. So the best way for me to achieve an exception to the rule is to make sure that I declare that as intentional to the software. And the way to do that is with a character style. So I'm going to come to my panels here. I'm going to come back down to my type menu in the window drop down, and I'm going to choose character styles this time. And I'm going to create a new character style. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to select this text before I create that new character style so that it pulls in most of what I need. And this time again, I want to name the style sheet based on its place in the text or its purpose in the text rather than what it looks like. So rather than naming it something like red or italic or bold, I might change my mind about that later. So I'm going to name this EM for emphasis. I could name it all the way out, but EM will work. It's short, and that's also web nomenclature. So we'll see this when we start learning about how to design for the web as well. What I can do now is take my basic character formats, and Illustrator won't let me do this. InDesign will. InDesign would let me choose italic or bold without having to specify a family, but in this case I have to specify a family. So I'm going to come back to find Garamond. And from there, I can choose bold italic. And it looks like I might even have to choose a type size. I forget what size we were at. Let's see if I can pick it up from anywhere in the interface. You do want to make sure it's the same size as the rest of your paragraph text. I'm going to choose, I want to say I might be at around 16 point. Just doesn't seem to be previewing at all right now. So let me select this again and make sure that I apply this emphasis paragraph style. Yeah, too big. Okay, so let's see what happens. Let me open this up and see what my size was here. It's 14. Okay, so I'm going to come back here, change my style sheet to 14. Now you don't have to use these exact ones. As a matter of fact, I'd rather you didn't. I'd rather you explore different ways to go about it. So it might also be that I come back and maybe I choose a different color. Right now I'm using a lot of neutral tones, so I could use this as an accent color that might start to set the tone for the next posters in the series. I still want to make sure that it's legible. And so in this case, maybe I want to go with, oh, that's doing a stroke color. We never want to put a stroke on type. We always want to make sure that we just choose a type that has the thickness that we need. So let me come back down and try that. Now it matches with my border here. I'm not sure how legible that's going to be on this gray color behind it. So let's see what my other options might be. Maybe I should go for kind of a darker green. Not really liking that either. Go with kind of a purpley color. Okay, again, not the best. We might want to just stick with black. I think that's what I'm going to do here. See if I can open this up and remove that color. So I'm not really liking that. So I'm going to stick with black. But then what we want to do is go through, and when we see these color names mentioned in the text, really you only need to do it once, but you want to apply that emphasis style sheet, and that way whenever you select your paragraph text, or when I'm grading your paragraph text, I won't see any style sheet overrides because there's a character style applied that makes it really clear that that's an intentional exception that we're making. So there's still some more that I could do to this, but overall I think that this is a good place to stop and allow you to continue to explore further based on what you're learning here. I would probably want, again, to balance these out. Maybe the last thing we should talk about, though, before we move on is making sure everything's optically correct. So I'm going to be grading you on your precision, but after you've finished with all of this would be the time that you would also want to make adjustments to the exceptions in scale. And so what I'm seeing here is that this star looks very, very small, right, compared to all the rest of the shapes. And so in this case, I might want to choose to make this bigger so that it is optically correct. And what optically correct means, in simple terms, is it just looks right. So what I'm going to do now is choose this. I want to keep it in the same place, because also, since the star is pointed and all of these are flat, it looks like there's more space between the shape and its name here as well. And so what I really want to do is actually expand this from its center so that these points come a little further down, and the star itself is going to be a little bit bigger than 1 1/4 inches, but it's going to look better compared to all of the other shapes. So what I'm going to do is come back. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to select my star, and this time, instead of using transform, I'm going to use the scale tool. That exists in the same folder as the reflect tool that we used earlier to make the diamond. I'm going to open up the scale tool, but rather than trying to scale it freehand, and this is a confusing aspect of the software too. So when I want to create a shape using my shape tool, I select the tool and then double click on the pasteboard. If I want to scale predictably, I have to double click the icon. So I'm going to double click that icon. You can see the crosshairs are kind of on the center of the shape, so I'm going to leave it there. I do want to scale uniformly. And another thing that I want you to be aware of is within the scale tool, you do have the ability to scale strokes and effects. This is really important if you create some artwork in Illustrator like a logo and you need to make it bigger or smaller. If you don't have that enabled, then it's going to keep them at the same size rather than within proportion, and it can really mess up some of the artwork that you've done. So turn this on, and then I'm going to choose uniform. I don't need to scale it up by a ton, but I'm going to try. Now if I put my mouse in here and click right here, I can actually use the trackball or the tracking. I'm using a magic mouse, so I'm actually just sliding my finger on the top of it. But I can actually have it adjust little by little, which helps a lot because then I can really do it based on what looks right. So in this case, I don't want it to be incredibly evident that that point's higher than all the others, but I do want to start creating a little bit more balance. And so I'm going to think right around here. And that's starting to look a little bit better. It still looks kind of small, partly because there's so much space above it, and also because it happens to be on the same line with some of the biggest, heaviest shapes on the page. So I'd probably want to rearrange these. And what I'd probably do, honestly, is consider moving my octagon, my star, and maybe my horizontal and vertical lines to all rest on this bottom line. And then I would rearrange everything else. If I wanted to do that, let me just give you a quick rundown of how I would do that. I would probably group my shapes and their descriptions together as individual cards, if you will. And the ones that I want to move, I would then use my alignment and distribution tools to be able to move them without having to do a whole lot of work to move them around. So I know I'm going to move these and these. So let's see. And what I want to do is keep the octagon down there. I probably want horizontal lines on the edge and octagon on the edge. And then I want star to move somewhere else. So let's see what we can do. I'm actually just going to flip the star and the horizontal lines since they're so close. So what I could do is select that, and see they're already aligned on their center. So now it's just a matter of moving them based on some of the other metrics, right? So I can select my star, and for now I'm going to select the, I'm going to select the horizontal lines because it's already grouped and I want to align these based on their top. So I'm going to come to my alignment tools and align across the top. That gets the star where I need it to be. So then I can deselect the star. And now I've got my horizontal lines selected. And what I can do now is select the top of the octagon, make it my key object, and come again to my alignment tools and align them across the top. And so I basically flip-flop these without having to do a ton of additional work. That's already starting to look just a little bit better. Next, I might want to move my vertical lines. Probably makes sense for them to be pretty close to my horizontal lines. So I'm going to start by switching the pentagon with the vertical lines here. Just select each card. I'm going to make the vertical lines my key object so I can move my pentagon. And the quickest move is going to be to just snap it to the top and then deselect it. That's the harder part now, though, because it's behind the other. Let's see, I've still got it selected. So what I may want to do is just click off in the pasteboard here, make sure I'm hovering over a line, select that, and then I can select the hexagon, make it the key object, and a line across the top. So you get the idea of how we're moving around here. And then we just have the matter of these pieces of text looking a little different. So what I'm going to do is take my vertical line and I'm going to align it with a key object of the octagon on center. And then I'm going to try to grab my octagon instead of my vertical lines. If that proves difficult to do or easier said than done, I could temporarily lock them. So I select the vertical lines and then do a Command 2, which locks them. That way I can select the octagon without any issues. And I'm going to select something in this last column here as my reference object. And again, a line on center here. And that kind of rearranges everything in a way that's a little bit more visually appealing. By having these as end caps on the bottom row, it creates this sort of a taper effect and a curve to the bottom of the poster. Having these with the longer text also helps. It puts my star next to another irregular shape, so it still feels a little bit smaller than this, but this is overall just a slightly better choice, to order these in and to lay them out and just to create a little bit more balance on the page.